we inherently believe that everyone wants to be generous in whatever that capacity is defined by. Clearly, as a donor advised fund, we flow funds and unleash and unlock that generosity with our partners. There is a lot of things behind the curtain that, of course, in disclosures and communication and all of that, but, donors are not always reading that information, right? That's that gap in education. And so that friction is making sure that those funds are compliant, that nonprofit is compliant with the IRS. And that is the weight that we take away.
Welcome to episode 4 of the IVI podcast, where we talk with innovators and visionaries making an impact. My guest today is Melissa Martin, Chief Operating Officer of For Good, one of the largest, most successful donor-advised fund platforms in the United States. When we think of innovators, charitable organizations are not typically at the top of the list, but For Good is a huge exception to that rule. Listen as we discuss how an organization founded by visionaries over 20 years ago continues to lead in a time where innovation is critical to nonprofit growth and survival. Let's jump in. Melissa Martin, welcome to the IVI podcast.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Joe.
Great to have you here. And I got to tell you, I've been looking forward to this one. We've been trying to schedule it for the last month or so. And with everything that's going on right now, I think that the timing of this discussion is pretty important. So I'm really looking forward to the next hour talking with you, learn a little bit more about your organization, talking through some of the things that For Good is working on right now. You guys are at the forefront of a lot of the things that are occurring. And I would just say that in kind of thinking back, as we're involved in the giving in the philanthropic industry. You are directly involved in it. I can't think of a more consequential time in philanthropy, right? I mean, you can think back and, you maybe can go back to the, 20s and 30s when big philanthropy was important. I feel like we've moved from big philanthropy to the importance of small philanthropy, really getting people engaged and active. And, with the things that are occurring in Washington and the pulling back of funding, this just feels like a really important conversation today. So I really appreciate you taking time to join us.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. I'm excited.
So why don't we start with kind of the obligatory, who are you guys? And I want to break that into a couple of pieces because For Good has a super interesting backstory. Before we get to the backstory, let's just talk a little bit about who you are today and what you all are involved with. And then we'll kind of back into some of these other interesting things.
Yeah, of course. For Good, formerly known as the Network for Good, donor advised fund, at the core of who we are and our mission has always been for the past, 23, 24 years has been to unleash generosity and make the giving experience frictionless as much as we can, right? Being a set of policies and bringing money into the DAF and getting that money to the nonprofits to empower them to do what they do best, right? Which is carry out their missions and visions. That is minus all the history that I think we'll get into a little bit, but that is the core of who we are and who we breathe into today for nonprofits. That is our who we service, our nonprofits and our donors.
Okay, we're gonna dive into the donor advised fund because that's obviously been a pretty hot topic as well. You guys are at the forefront of that. But I was thinking, I don't know if you know this or not, but you all have to be one of the largest donor advised funds on the planet. Now, they're large sponsoring organizations. The Fidelity Charitables have $30 or $40 billion, but a donor advised fund doing the type of work you're doing, I can't think of an organization that's larger. I mean, maybe there are out there, but maybe talk a little bit about historically what you've done, because the numbers in those 23 years that you've brought to the table are incredible.
Yeah, yeah. It is a gift to be able to like share those numbers
Yeah.
of, over the years, right? Since we've been born.
Yeah.
We have moved $5.5 billion through the system to nonprofits, right? Like that is a meaty number to sit with. When you think about
It
the
is.
small to medium nonprofits that are doing work out right outside your front door, right outside my front door, right? And that is
Right.
over $5 billion to over 450,000 charities across the US. So it's just been an incredible journey, even before my time at For Good, to see the evolution of the technology, to see how nonprofits are receiving funds from us as well. It's been a wonderful journey.
I mean, 450,000 charities that you all have supported. I mean, I don't care if it's over 23 years, 450,000 charities in the United States, and a combined total of $5 billion given to those charities. I mean, you all are obviously onto something, and you obviously are doing things right. And I think one of the things that I love about your organization is, as you know, this is called the IVI podcast, and we talk to innovators and visionaries about impact.
Yeah, yeah.
And I would argue that if I were to say innovator and visionary, a charitable organization would not be the next word that followed that, right? The industry, I think, is working on that, but charitable organizations have not really been known as innovators and visionaries. I would say that For Good is one of those exceptions to that rule. The way that you all started, super interesting. How you've built your organization, fascinating, and the ability to give that amount of money away to those numbers of charities is just phenomenal. So I want to go back to the Network for Good days, because I think that, just kind of unwrapping who you are, I want to start back there, because that backstory to me is super interesting. It's Cisco, it's Yahoo, and it's AOL, right? So, I mean, you have this connection not only to technology, but to Silicon Valley technology companies. And really, they were the FANGs before FANGs were a thing, right? I mean, they were the pioneers. Could you talk a little bit about that vision and how those innovative companies kind of came together to create Network for Good, and then progress us up to where we are currently?
Yeah, 2001, right? The founders,
Right.
like you said, Cisco, Yahoo, AOL, big names in the history of, let's just call it like the internet, right? And technology, and came together and founded the nonprofit, Network for Good, with the goal of scaling generosity and meeting donors where they're at in the environments that they are most comfortable with, so that we could increase velocity of charitable funds and, make sure that the technology is supporting that with a set of policies, really, right? In a compliant way. So I think that is, you said it's like visionaries and innovators, right? And it's really, when you're a visionary and an innovator, you're really disrupting the space, right? And so you're disrupting what I think you and I probably have as a history of philanthropy, right? And like what that means to you and I in our big age or young age, right? But, when you think about these founders coming together with tech in mind, but wanting to do good for good, that's how the Network for Good was born, and to funnel and be a vessel for generosity.
Well, it's fascinating to me, because these tech companies are hyper competitive with one another, right? And I remember the Ciscos and the Yahoo days, right? As these things were getting stood up, but yet, these founders, and I'm assuming that it was really founder driven, right? You still have a whole bunch of AOL alumni that sit on your board, right? So, I mean, you're still connected there. But I was just fascinated at the fact that they were able to put the competitive nature of their for-profit business to one side and really think about how they could consolidate. Can you comment on that a little bit for me?
Yeah, I think that is which we've talked about before, is that is kind of the new way. That was the thinking around corporate social responsibility before it was a term that I think folks like Gavinga and yourselves and folks like us and other giving platforms are thinking about in collaboration with brands, right? And so that kind of corporate responsibility on the for-profit side, but then founding a nonprofit to do the good, to also brand awareness of like, we are AOL, we are Cisco, we are Yahoo. And yes, to your point, we have for-profit, but how are we using that to show our brand recognition in the giving space, in the good space, being a do-gooder while we're providing a service that we're making a profit from?
Right. It's interesting because you have these tech founders. They have this idea. I'm assuming that a pretty significant portion of Network for Good's early donations came from those three companies. Is that a fair statement, or did they really branch out quickly once they created the vehicle?
So fair statement, but with the technology, with the set of policies, branched out pretty quickly with the services as a nonprofit donor advised fund.
Being involved in the technology arena, right? And having these technology companies working for you or, working with you, founding, interacting with the organization. Did that insert technology into your platform in a meaningful way?
Yeah. So founding the nonprofit, but then, kind of fast forwarding, to your point about integrating technology into that, like we are not a tech company, right? I think we are very tech adjacent, but we spun out a .com, right? And those were the technology tools for fundraising and all of that. So that's where, you have the nonprofit as a set of policies and compliance to move the money. And then you have this spin out of the .com to be the tech company, right? To be the tech engine for nonprofits to scale their business or, to scale their operations.
Right. Okay, so you have this group of tech entrepreneurs. They create this organization. The organization starts to grow. Was there kind of a foundational place that you all were focused on giving back? Was it geographic? I guess, what was the reason to start it other than, everyone's making a lot of money, they want to create this platform, but did they have a vision for how they wanted those dollars to be spent?
Yeah. So vision for dollars was really the small to medium folks that don't have the ability to let's go to the galas, the golf tournaments, or kind of your advisory board or something having an event, is to be able to provide a tool, a public utility for these nonprofits that cannot do those big things, right? Because they don't have those big dollars behind them yet, and be that service, be that vehicle for those funds, and so that they could do what they do best. But there wasn't the kind of background of, okay, we want to just give to climate, or we want to make sure that we're servicing youth poverty. It was really like, let's be the public utility so we can cast the net wide and for the long haul.
Okay, that's super interesting. And it's amazing how that parallels with where we are right now, right? Because there's a big donor called the federal government that's decided to, exit the business, right? And now you have a void that has been created as they leave, and you have the charitable industry really trying to assess, how do we fill that void? And it feels to me like you all, right, have been doing that for 20, 25 years, right? Because my opinion on this is that when there's a crisis like this, the old adage, crisis leads to opportunity. I think that there's a real opportunity for the nonprofit world to reset here and think about technology, think about organizations that are embedded like you all are, and really utilize your expertise to broaden their exposure, right? To get themselves away from reliance on federal government money, especially given these massive pools of capital that are kind of in existence around them right now, but have been kind of inaccessible to a lot of these charitable organizations. So I feel like you all, with your history, are in a very, very unique place to have and to provide leadership as organizations struggle through this change from the federal government.
Yeah, I mean, that's spot on, right? If you think about, we've been here in the space for 23 plus years.
Yeah.
Donor advised funds have been around, did we say like 80 years or something like that?
Right. I think the first one was founded in the 30s. We'll get into those in a minute. Yeah.
And if you think about, just the time that we have existed at any organization, but you're going to endure hills and valleys, right? And our nonprofit community is going through hills and valleys right now. And then just us as operators are also experiencing how those hills and valleys in the government, in other, spaces of giving and philanthropy are impacting our business. But with a set of policies, holding true to those policies and holding true to our mission and vision, but also to your point, Joe, like disrupting the space.
Yes.
Is where we have survived that. Like, what now is a better time than any for us to show up and show out. So I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit later, but because of the 80-year history of donor advised funds, there's also a moment that I've been really reflecting on, is that we need to do some re-education of what a donor advised fund is, what is the benefit of a donor advised fund, and how that can be integrated with other technology, be integrated into other platforms, and then also be integrated into your corporate strategy of giving and what employees care about, and then also what do your customers care about, because they're going to keep coming to you because of that integration of corporate social responsibility and impact.
Well, we are going to re-educate today. We are going to do some re-education around donor advised funds. And I know that my co-founder will watch this segment at some point, and right now he's got his hand on his forehead and he's kind of shaking his head. He's like, "Here he goes." But we're not. I'm gonna keep it. I'm gonna keep it tight.
All right.
Those vehicles, I am a huge advocate for. I mean, it's basis for how we stood Govinga, the company, up.
Exactly.
It's the basis for the work that we're doing to support you all, and I feel like they're the most misunderstood, non-used, unbelievably flexible vehicle on the planet, right?
Yeah,
and I think they're going to be the key to expanding this opportunity set for not only donors, but for charities. So I'm looking forward to talking about that. Let me stay on one last thing because it's just fascinating to me. So my interaction with you all started with Abby Ross. This was probably two and a half years ago. Super smart, tech-oriented CEO. She was CEO of Network for Good, and now she has become CEO of the Resiliency Company. And I got to tell you, I was doing my research, and I'm like, how do these things fit together, right? I went in, I looked at the Resiliency Company website, and literally I saw a blurb in your website that basically said that Resiliency was a spin out from For Good and is now acting as the umbrella. And I said, how is Resiliency Company spin out a network out of For Good and act as the umbrella? So I literally went to our nonprofit attorneys and said, how do they do this? Right? Because I know they're smarter than me and they've been doing this for a while. So educate me. And it turns out that you can spin out I guess it's a corporate nonprofit, I guess is the way that it's described. And then that corporate nonprofit has very much the same kind of similarities as a 501c, but it acts in this capacity and it allows it to act as the umbrella. So that was a learning exercise for me as I was getting ready for this. But maybe talk a little bit about how that structure has been set up and what you all are looking to do in the next kind of phase of this.
Joe, I appreciate you're well researched.
Hey, we try.
Yeah, I mean, you pulled in all the stakeholders, but yeah, if you think about For Good, or formerly known as Network for Good, and the Resiliency Company, really the foundation is the same, right? It's providing capital or resource, right, for a more just society.
Yes.
Resiliency out of the kind of climate and natural disasters and how that impacts. I think that the statistic is like 90% of the counties across the U.S.
Right.
And so that was part of Abby's vision of, how can we continue to be this vehicle in a donor advised fund with For Good, but also be a vehicle and a vessel for capital in the resiliency, space.
Okay.
And, the climate space. And so we'd have two separate strategies. Obviously, we work very well together because there is overlap with partnerships and other organizations, especially since we have a service as a donor advised fund. But we have two separate boards in, two separate strategies that we're working on. But there is some overlap, obviously, because we're in that space. But it works really well on actually the education from Resiliency Co., what they're learning in their space, and then from For Good, what we're learning in our space too, right? Because there's turbulence and celebration in both spaces that can literally learn from one another and can be a service to each other.
Right. And so Resiliency Corp is primarily focused on this broad climate initiative that's underway. But
Yep.
I'm assuming that they will still be integrating and using For Good's donor advised fund as it relates to fundraising, pushing money out to charity, and all of that. Is that a fair statement?
There's opportunity for that, right? I think that is not the core of the strategy per se,
Right.
but there's opportunity that we are learning as we both are entering this space of how can initiatives and projects within the Resiliency Co., if that's fiscally sponsored program, right, leverage the donor advised fund of For Good for, their mission and vision.
Okay, so I get it. Resiliency is doing that. You all are still aligned, but For Good has an entirely separate and distinct business model that you all are operating under.
Exactly.
And you're using the strength of that donor advised fund to really focus on frictionless giving. When we were talking before we got on here, you mentioned the friction problem in giving, right? And I think that I'd like you to elaborate a little bit on that, because I think that the friction problem is best solved by our next topic, right? Which is this vehicle called a donor advised fund, and getting that in the hands of as many people as possible. So maybe talk first about the problem, then we'll talk a little bit about the solution.
I think the problem, I'm gonna flip it a little bit, Joe. I think the problem is that we inherently believe that everyone wants to be generous in whatever that capacity is defined by. Clearly, as a donor advised fund, we flow funds and unleash and unlock that generosity with our partners. There is a lot of things behind the curtain that, of course, in disclosures and communication and all of that, but, donors are not always reading that information, right? That's that gap in education. And so that friction is making sure that those funds are compliant, that nonprofit is compliant with the IRS. And that is the weight that we take away, right? You donate, you get your tax document, and we take everything else forward. Whether that is for our corporate partners and, our individual donors, that is the piece that we have a storied legacy of excellence that I like to call is, with partners like yourself and, obviously our other customers, it is an opportunity for us to say, hey, you give in that environment that you are most comfortable with and to the charity that you most believe in and want to impact. Let us do all of the behind the scenes, and then you can see that impact as that nonprofit that you press the yes button for or the roundup button for at Walmart, get those funds and those resources and do good.
Right. It's super interesting. It's actually funny when we first kind of jumped into this business and we were looking around and trying to figure out markets and products and fit and all those things that, companies go through. You look at charitable giving, and on the outside, a couple of things pop up. First, it's super easy. I just whip out a credit card, I give money to charity, I go about my day, no problem. is probably one of the most difficult processes that I've been involved with. I mean, it seems easy, but if you're going to do it well and you're going to remove friction and you're going to do it efficiently, and then you're going to empower the users of these products, you have to build technology and you have to build systems that allow for those people to see that friction flow away, for people to track all of this, activity and data as it's going from one account to another.
Mm-hmm.
And, the thing that struck me, and it would probably struck me more because I'm on the for-profit side, but, charitable giving is this funny industry where you're almost perceived guilty until you prove yourself innocent. And what I mean, and you agree with me, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like anything goes wrong and the user of the platform immediately diverts to,
Sure.
You didn't do what I told you to do. My money didn't go to charity. Someone's stealing things behind the scenes. It's this incredible weight that you bear when you get involved with this, because I think that giving, rightfully so, is extremely personal to people, right? You're
Yes.
taking money out of your wallet, you're giving it to something that's important to you, and you want to make
Yep.
sure that it goes there. So it's this level of responsibility that kind of
Yes.
piles on top. And you all have been thinking a lot about that. So, I mean, I'm assuming that you see the same things I do.
Yeah, it is. You just kind of touched on it a little bit. There is this individual relationship that is unsaid. It's implicit that
Right.
the donor, whether they are at Walmart in a Spark Good Roundup program, they are at that moment that you are saying yes to rounding up or making that charitable donation at the store, you are engaging an individual relationship long term with the donor advised fund, right? Like that is when you're saying yes, like, I trust you, you've got this, I know it's going to get to where it needs to. And then let me rewind, if not, which I think we'll talk about a little bit, right? Is like the flexibility of a donor advised fund.
Right.
Is that if not, there's an opportunity. Yes, we will come back to you to honor your donor intent. But like, let's say that we can't, for whatever reason, the nonprofit dissolved, whatever, compliance, all of that we can't get that. We still are going to ask you, hey, do you want to get this money to, these match charities?
Right.
And
Something
if
that
not,
looks similar, acts similar.
yes,
Exactly.
yeah, but they believe that, like, the donor believes and knows, because we've eliminated that friction, we're still going to honor your intent, because your intent initially was to just give a donation.
Right.
Yes, to a nonprofit that of your choice. But if we needed to, redirect that somewhere, we have the flexibility, and legally we have the ability to do that and still honor that you want to do good for good.
And now you're pulling the corporation's reputation in with you, right? So, someone rounds up at Walmart, they're interacting with For Good and they're interacting with
Right.
Donor Advised Fund, but they're also putting their trust that the partner
Exactly.
that Walmart has chosen is going to
Exactly.
take those dollars and actually do specifically what they said they were going to do with them.
Exactly.
And that's where I think, the technology part of this is interesting, right? Because if technology can give you this ability to expand, right, and to cover a lot more giving activity than you could without it, it also gives you transparency, right? It gives you the ability not only to be as transparent as you want to be, but also to control how that transparency is projected. And I throw that one in there because, as giving has become politicized, right? And for all the reasons that we all know, we don't have to jump into that. I mean, it's just the reality of the situation. I think it spooked companies to some extent to get involved. And I think
Indeed.
that we'll jump right in now to the donor advised funds. What that vehicle, combined with technology, combined with a platform like yours, does is it allows those companies to control all of that. And I think one of the biggest problems that we've seen, specifically here over the last year or so, is companies have gotten on the wrong side of the politics because they have not been in control of the information, right?
Yeah.
They're trying to do the right things. They're trying to respond to their employees. They're
Right.
trying to push money out. then all of a sudden the winds of the political world change. They're on the wrong side. They're backpedaling, right?
Yep.
And now it's this vicious cycle that they get in of trying to unwind something that was intended to do good, and now they're in a situation that's hurting their brand. So I think that your structure and what you have can really help companies kind of navigate some of the political choppiness that we're seeing right now associated with charitable giving.
Agreed.
So let's talk about the DAF. And as I said, my partner will laugh because I said, let's talk about the DAF, and we're like halfway through, so he knows I can't go as long as I want to go on this. But, I've been a huge advocate of donor advised funds. I think, as you know, the industry's been around since the 1930s.
Yeah.
It's growing massively. I think when the numbers come out this year, average total assets in donor advised funds will eclipse $300 billion for the first time. It's been growing by 35% a year.
Yeah.
And yet no one knows what a DAF is. No one knows how a DAF works. No one knows the features and the benefits of donor advised funds. And to me, they're the vehicle that is going to open philanthropy to a broad part of the population once we get that word out. So let's start talking about these things right now. What's your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you and I would be having this conversation if we didn't have a shared opinion on DAFs. And I can't help but not go back to just the education that is missing. We've been around, DAFs have been around for a long time. A little bit under assault right now, and that's because there's just like a missed opportunity on education, and how For Good has been laced with technology to really deliver. Like, we are not parking funds, right? The traditional mindset, or the traditional way that we've set up donor advised funds, has been a parking lot, right? It's been a parking lot of funds versus when you think about For Good and other DAFs that maybe are similar to For Good, is we are pass-through DAF, right?
Yeah.
We bring it in, we put the policies in place, the technology does its thing for transparency, for reporting purposes, for the nonprofits' benefit, for the donors' benefit, and then we get that money out as fast as possible.
Right.
We're not waiting for a request to come in. If you think about other traditional donor advised funds, like, we are responsive because that's the way, like, that's the flexibility of the donor advised fund, and that's the policies that we set in place as we operate it.
Do you know what your withdrawal percentage is on a?
Yeah, the average over the past 5 years, we have been hitting at 95.5.
95.5% per year. Okay, so let me just kind of talk a little bit about that,
please.
So the donor advised fund industry, probably the biggest thing that it gets poked at the donor advised fund industry is this exact thing. And it's maddening to me because it's this massive industry and it lacks certain fundamental things. Like, it lacks one true calculation for how to calculate withdrawal rate. So if you look, almost every company calculates their withdrawal rate differently, and they calculate it that way to make their withdrawal rate look better than it is.
Sure.
And there's one very large provider out there that uses 5-year average assets against year-to-date withdrawals to calculate that withdrawal rate. So it's misleading. But, in everything that I've looked at, and we've done a deep dive into this, the average donor advised fund is giving somewhere between 9 and 15% of their assets a year. Now, there's some outliers that are maybe a little bit, and I'm talking about the large players that have been around for a while. 95% is unheard of. And to your point, donor advised funds being used in this way is unheard of. And that's one of the things where, you look at where Congress is focused, you look at where some of the people in Boston are focused. They're focused on the withdrawal rate. And their view is that the only way to fix that is to put government controls in place. And my view is, you don't need government controls. Just put companies like For Good and let them go out and start building these structures that really bring out how a donor advised fund should be used. So, that 95% pass-through is unbelievable. I think I thought our number was good. I think our number is like 80 or 85%. And I was like, man, this is great.
Yeah.
And you've eclipsed me by 15 percentage points.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Was that a decision that you all made? Was it as the DAF was stood up? Because DAFs were created, and maybe talk a little bit about the history of this and who has traditionally owned DAFs, because it's who has owned them equals why that withdrawal rate is so low.
Sure.
But I'm assuming that this was a policy of yours forever.
Yeah, that's why we've endured the hills and valleys, is that the policy was to be a deliverer of generosity, right? And when you deliver things, you're not parking it in your FedEx truck and holding on to it. You got to get it there fast, especially when our mission is to unlock the generosity. And so we can't be the bottleneck to that.
Right.
Like some other, donor advised funds have been, right? Where it takes a long request, or you're doing it by the quarter.
Right.
Yeah, you're doing it by the quarter. There's a cycle that's a part of their policy, a part of the way that they operate. The way that we operate in our cycle is immediate, right? It comes in, we do what we need to do, and we get it right out. We got to deliver that. We're not parking it.
And you can't do that without tech, right?
Exactly.
I think that's one of the things that I've really noticed with the industry is the industry without technology. It's way harder for those assets to get pulled from the donor advised fund account.
Yeah. And you make a really good point, Joe. And you touched on it a little earlier about how, nonprofits traditionally haven't had the resource, the capacity, or sometimes even the staff, right, to integrate technology into their strategy and how they operate so that they can scale and be here for a long haul. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where this opportunity that you and I are speaking about right now is to re-educate, refresh that on how a very traditional, kind of donor advised fund has integrated with technology to service Walmart, to service Patagonia. And these are brands that in every, I walk up to anybody and they either shop there, they know of it, or right. They've engaged in an event. So there's this huge opportunity that we're missing, that I think Govinga, folks like For Good, are really trying to step into that space.
It is a fascinating industry because there's so many counterintuitive things to it. And mm-hmm. I'll give you an example. So if you ask a charitable organization what is behind some of the problems that they're having, mm-hmm. and this is before the federal government pulls $250 billion away from them, okay? Sure. But if you ask, what's causing some of the problems, one of the culprits that they would point to is the donor advised fund, right? There is a love-hate relationship, and it's more angled on hate than love at this point with charities and donor advised funds, because the way that those funds have been structured and the way that they have been set up, they foster a hold mentality, right? Mm-hmm. So I get the tax deduction, I put money into a DAF, the DAF advertises that I don't need to do anything with it ever if I don't want to.
Right.
They attach a whole bunch of investment vehicles to it, right? Which once again focuses me long term. And then they don't provide the technology that allows me to very simply move those assets from the donor advised fund out to charity. So I understand that. But now we have this movement underway, and it's mm-hmm. really being led by organizations like For Good, where you're taking technology and we're using technology to foster that movement, right? And so it's not only an education, in my opinion,
Agreed.
Of the donor advised fund owner, holder, mm-hmm. it is an education of the charitable organizations and getting them to interact properly with donor advised funds. What do you agree with that?
Yes, short answer is I agree with you, Joe. But that is my hope, right? Is that we are engaging and influencing.
Yes.
as we have been this public utility
Yes.
for all this time. But the only way that we've been able to do that is through the technology that allows us to be the delivery vehicle, right?
Right.
That's to my point about, nonprofits just haven't had the capacity, right? And then to your point about charitable organizations is how can they start to engage with donor advised funds and ask the questions that how a For Good operates, right? If they're not engaging with For Good or Gavinga, like who are they engaging with and what questions are they asking as visionaries and innovators in their own respective spaces, but then pushing their, current provider as a visionary or disruptor in this space, because we are moving into, or we have already moved into, a giving environment that needs to be responsive.
Yes.
In real time. Needs to be, there's this quote in my office that says, be here now. And I think I live by that in my personal life and my professional life. And I think that's where DAFs can show up and show out, is be here now. And that's what we've been doing with For Good. And it's hands down because of how we have integrated technology into the DAF.
Well, it seems to me like you all are uniquely positioned with an incredible platform, right? I mean, you're interacting and have been interacting with 500,000 charities in the United States, right? Question for you. Do those charities understand what For Good is and how For Good operates? And if they don't, are you all thinking about what you can do to kind of, shine light on this differentiated way of using donor advised funds?
Yeah, such a fair question. So I think there's a yes and no answer to that question, because we've been here for so long. And I remember, starting here a year and some change ago and being out in the market. Everyone knew who I was by my badge, by how I was introducing myself. And this is me being in spaces with nonprofit EDs. And they knew because they had received a check or a disbursement, a grant from Network for Good, now For Good. But then that no piece is, to your our earlier conversation, what the heck is a donor advised fund?
Right.
I haven't, I haven't received a grant from y'all before. Explain this to me, explain this flexibility vehicle to me, this planning vehicle to me. So yeah, there's definitely a hands down yes. I that is our history of excellence. But then there's this no of how do we actually preview the questions that nonprofits or charitable giving organizations should be asking.
Right.
As we are new customers, current customers, they need to be asking these questions because they want to do things in the now and do it right. And that's how we've endured the hills and valleys. I can't stop emphasizing that, Joe.
Right.
That's what it is.
Well, we've worked with you all for a while now, so I've become, I think, familiar with what it is that you all do. And, I spend obviously a lot of time thinking about this stuff because it's what we collectively are trying to kind of solve for, right? Mm-hmm. And it dawns on me that you all are at this very critical juncture in the kind of growth and maturization of charitable giving. And, if you think about charities and you think about how charities operate, I would say that your average charity kind of follows this 80-20 rule, right? It's the old 80-20 rule. We're going to go focus 80% of our time, right, on the very small group of people that can provide us, majority of our time on the small group of people that can provide us 80% of our revenue. And in the past, that's been large donors, foundations, high net worth individuals, and the federal government, right?
Correct.
So hey, we have all this new technology. Hey, this technology can open things for you. Hey, it can connect you to a, whole group of donors that you haven't had opportunities to connect with. And the response that you get is, we'd love to do that, except we're too busy running golf tournaments and setting up galas and writing and responding to grant proposals. We don't really have time for any of this. And now you have a massive tear in that rule. And the 80-20 no longer exists, in my opinion. And even more importantly, because of companies like yours, that 20% that's been ignored is this massive amount of people. And charities just have not done, it's not that they haven't done a good job, it's that they have not had access to the type of technology that you build that allows them to efficiently interact with this smaller but important giver. And, when someone asks me, why put technology into philanthropy? The answer that I give them is, well, when you install tech into any industry, it makes that industry more efficient. It opens it, it expands it, democratizes it, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like you guys are sitting in this really unique place, right? Because not only do you have this technology and you've been using it, you're founded by technologists, right? You have technology people sprinkled throughout your organization, but you also have this platform where you've interacted with all of these charities, right? And if we can figure out a way to get those two things combined and educate around how donor advised funds are not an enemy of charitable giving, they're actually, if they're used properly, an incredible amplifier to that business, then I think you're off to the races. So, I mean, are you all thinking about that type of structure?
So, I think what's interesting about that is, yes, but then because we cast the net so wide, and so traditionally, how we have been set up and how we operate, but the question that we have been brewing with as an organization is, where do we start to engage the nonprofit directly now, right? Like, that was a part of our history and kind of the different strategies that we have gone through as formerly Network for Good. And then, we became this vehicle of delivery, right? And strapped with a lot of technology to do that efficiently and cast the net wide. Now, with nonprofits in this moment of a valley and maybe a hill as well, how do we engage with them, right? And which kind of subset of that is it? Is it the large? Is it the small? Is it the medium organizations, to better understand, kind of use them as an advisory council, right? To better understand what are your needs in the here and now, and then to educate you on how to use a donor advised fund like For Good for the benefit of your organization and actually the sustainability of your organization. That is something that we have really been grappling with on, kind of our core operations, but also knowing that the stories on the other side of our accounting and finance as we, get the money out the door is the nonprofit, right? And while the nonprofit is joyful and excited to receive that check, it also is, okay, like, how can we impact your business? Right. And help you use us as a vehicle for that 80% that you need to disrupt right now. You got to disrupt how you're managing that 80%, because part of that 80% doesn't exist.
Right. It's fascinating. And as you said earlier, you were built on the foundation of, working with these small and intermediate charities and providing them with access to these types of tools. So I just think you guys are super uniquely positioned. We've been involved with you. It's been more around the corporate space. Mm-hmm. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that because, there's a void now that's been created by the federal government, right? So there's $250 billion void, and we've got to figure out how we fill that hole, right? Yep. And I think there's been a bunch of hand-wringing around that. And I've seen a lot of effects of that government decision, but I haven't seen, in my opinion, enough solutions around, federal government's gone away, right? What do we do about that? My opinion is that one of the big opportunities that exists in the market right now is for corporate America to step in and fill a part of that void. Probably not all of it, but sure. I think that companies, if they think about giving the way that you and I are thinking about giving, if they think about it as part of a strategic part of their organization, they can use some of this technology that you're providing to really drive giving through this kind of cohort that really hasn't had access to these types of vehicles. So talk to me a little bit about what you all are doing on the corporate side of the world.
Yeah, our customer base and our partnership base is kind of the corporate space right now, right? If you think about a program like Walmart Spark Good, right? They have done a phenomenal job of having a team of folks dedicated to philanthropic efforts, philanthropic tech. Like I said earlier, like everybody knows Walmart, everybody knows that logo. And that's at the store, right? That's at the store, or that's while people are ordering things online, and using a vehicle and technology like For Good Donor Advised Fund to help meet their strategic goals when it comes to philanthropic efforts and showing up and showing out in the community. I think there's other spaces where you think about showing up where I think have traditionally maybe been ignored or not elevated, which is like this new wave or new generation. I think a lot of folks are coining of givers in this space, and meeting them where they're at, which could be my 9-year-old on Roblox or Fortnite, right? And
exactly.
Those corporations leveraging their success, their profit, but integrating, because you have the developers, you have the designers, you have the staff, the employees that are interested in how they are showing up in the community, in their philanthropic efforts, in their corporate social responsibility. And I think that's where we come into play to be able to deliver on that, right? You have an idea of how you want to show up outside of how you're making profit, and you want that's employee retention, right? That's brand retention. That's folks coming back and forth through your door. But you're also working with the parent, making a checkout at Spark Good, or maybe even a high net worth person doing that too, right? But then you're also working with the 9 and 10-year-olds who want to give, who are consuming information, but then they're able to do this through that corporation's social responsibility initiative in partnership with us. Hopefully, Joe, like that answers your question. I get really excited about that because we can be that deliverer of generosity in partnership with corporations. Like we're doing that now.
Well, you think about Walmart's reach, and you think about Walmart's customer base, right? And you think about Walmart and their ability to drive change into the marketplace. And they're obviously doing that in a number of ways. And I think what really struck me about what you just said is so many times corporations think about corporate giving in kind of this one-dimensional fashion, right?
Sure.
We have a grant management product, or we want to give through our employees, or we've got a Dollars for Doers program. When in fact, there's these multiple layers that companies can get involved with. And it's almost this outside of the box giving mentality, right? So, I mean, you bring up gaming, right? And you bring up, where's this next generation of givers right now sitting and residing? And, you have to be working with companies like yours that have the ability to think like that outside of the traditional definition of what giving is, because that's changing right before our eyes. I mean, I've been saying it's changing right before our eyes, and then the government pulls the rug out from under people, and now it is really changing right before our eyes.
Right.
So, I guess the last thing I'd ask about this is that all of this, right? So the work that you're doing with Walmart requires a level of operational excellence, right? That they can't just go out and put together a Spark program like they have without your help. So can you talk a little bit about that and kind of the importance of that to, customers that you've got?
Yeah, you kind of said it a little bit earlier, but, in partnership with a corporation like Walmart, we are actually taking ownership over their brand, in the both the positive and the negative things that may circulate But like that is our responsibility in partnership with them. And, we provide this opportunity for them to design a program, know that they want to have this massive reach and they want that massive reach to grow, right? And we want it to grow, right? You and I know that there's new nonprofits coming into the market, getting their EINs every day.
Right.
And we're seeing them register for programs like Spark Good. And so it is, we are lock and step, right, on their program design, what they want, what their like kind of targets are for community impact, and then how we are doing it for them with the technology and the stories on the other side, right? We see that check, we see that ACH get into that account. And so that operational excellence, that's the frictionless, right? We can't, they have to know that we provide that frictionless experience, right? You're going to make the donation, you're going to get your tax document, and we're going to provide the reporting to the corporation. And you're also going to be able to see it as a donor in your portal, right? That's part of the technology. I get so kind of excited and a little emotional about it because that is where corporations are really taking a risk. And that's the only way that we're going to see change happening in this space is taking that risk. And that risk comes with technology. Yes. That risk comes with really being best friends with technology that can create urgency, responsiveness, and also care, right? Like obviously we are in an environment that comes with, regulations and policies. And so they have to know that that's what we do. And that's exactly what our frictionless process is care, urgency, and responsiveness.
Exactly. I mean, I would throw another C word in there, which would be control.
Exactly.
Right. Because what you basically are asking companies to do is you're asking them to think outside of the box, right? But then that company then is taking a risk
Absolutely.
to do that, right? So technology, if used properly, gives companies the ability to control all of this. And what's fascinating to me is when you think about corporate giving in general, I've referred to it as this kind of check the box exercise. It's like we fight against this all the time. We go in and, the company's making widgets over here and we're talking about charitable giving and doing all of this. And they have not yet connected how charitable giving aligns strategically with what that company is doing.
Yep.
And, we point to the Walmarts of the world, all right? We point to the Patagonias of the world, right? Who are not only smart for-profit companies, but they are super smart corporate citizens, right? They're super smart in the way that they think about philanthropy, the way that they integrate it internally into their systems and integrate with their customers. Exactly. And then they're also super smart with how they push that out into the market, because my opinion is that the reason corporations have got off sides is because they've not focused enough on the strategic aspect of this. They've treated it as check the box, and now the political winds have blown on top of them and they don't have structures in place. And that's what you all do at a very high level.
Yeah, we are getting away. We have to get away from the check the box off, right?
Right.
And I think, so For Good, just to give you a little anecdote, we did a really fun panel with a group of organizations consisted of some brand folks and some corporate folks, right? And really thinking out of the box and wild ideas. Yeah. And the common theme that came out of that panel is that the CSR, the corporate social responsibility space, has to be disrupted. It can no longer exist as just this nice to have. It's a must have with intention. Yes. And in order to be intentional and efficient is to leverage the technology in the vehicles like For Good's Donor Advised Fund or Goodfinga to move those funds and deliver them. That was such a fun panel to be able to think out of the box,
right,
and hear folks that have been in their roles for a very long time and seeing that we got to get away with that, right? And then also leveraging, interesting enough, the younger employee base on
Yes.
what they care about, because we as leaders, innovators, visionaries, there can be something we care about, but is that really where our employees are, right? And then striking the balance, of course, right? But I think corporations are being very intentional and responsive to what the environment needs, as well as how they show up as someone's employer.
Right. I think breaking the cycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a super important part of what you all are doing, because there is a cycle. And in some cases, that cycle is decades old, right? I mean, like I'll use like corporate matching as an example, right?
Yeah.
First corporate matching program was instituted by GE in like 1955. And that corporate matching program that they instituted looks identical to almost every corporate matching program that's done today, right? And they're getting the same type of employee response. Sure. They're getting like 10% of the employees using it. Nobody really cares. They're not giving away their budgeted dollars because they have not broken that cycle and rethought, okay, what are we trying to accomplish here with corporate matching? What are we trying to do from a corporate standpoint, from an employee standpoint? And your comment on the young, and which is every time I say the young, I'm like, well, hold it, I'm young. But then my kids remind me, they're like, no, you're not young. This isn't about you, Dad. This is about, the 3 generations that are below you now. But, the young people in this equation are thinking about things very differently from the way that their parents thought about it. They're thinking about, how they interact with their companies differently. They're thinking about social impact differently. They're looking at some of these big problems that exist. And I think if you can align, corporate with that, and you can sit in the middle of that, that's going to have a meaningful impact. But you can't do it without the operational excellence, that you're talking about. And operational excellence cannot be done unless you're a tech company. You just can't. Unless you have the tech, you can talk the talk, but it's very hard to walk the walk.
Exactly. Well said.
Right. Okay. So, did we cover everything? I mean, I could talk forever on DAFs, but I feel like we've got a good set of things that we've talked about. I have a much better understanding about what it is that you all do. I'm super excited about where your organization's going. So let's finish with the most popular part of my podcast, which is the quick hits. You already gave me one quote. Do you have another one that you follow?
I'll give you this one. If you remember, Amanda Gorman was probably one of the youngest poets at the 2021 inauguration.
Right. She read at the inauguration. That's right.
Yep. She read at the inauguration. It's up in my office, but I think it really actually, and I was surprised that it summed up a lot of the things that you and I spoke about today, is in this truth, in this faith, we trust. For while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. That's where the history of donor advised funds are really looking to us to disrupt and educate this space so that we can continue to be here for the long haul and be that public utility that casts the net wide and is a tool for nonprofits and a tool for corporations. We can't forget the history, but it is looking for us to do things different, but use the foundation that worked and expand on that.
I love talking to someone that works for a nonprofit who's now used the word disrupt like 4 or 5 times, because that's what this is all about. Yeah. And most nonprofits don't disrupt. Most nonprofits come in and do the same thing over and over again and then wonder why it isn't working. But I think that your focus on positively disrupting is commendable. What's a book that you're reading, or a book that had lasting impact on you?
Oh, my go-to always in this question is Radical Candor. We don't have time to beat around the bush. Yeah. We have a diverse set of perspectives when we are in the charitable space and lived experiences. Being intentional, being thoughtful about how we deliver feedback, how we deliver the disruption. Radical Candor will be my go-to for a long time.
Okay, I've got that one. I've got that one down. How do you unplug? What do you do for fun outside of?
I play a lot of tennis, Joe.
Do you?
A lot. And you have lived in Chicago, and so I only get a certain amount of months to be outdoor on the court. The rest of my time is on the indoor courts.
Right. I didn't grow up in Chicago, but I feel like Chicago's my home. I spent 20 years there. And your window you play outdoor tennis?
I do. Both.
Your window for outdoor tennis is a very, very narrow one.
Very small, very small.
It basically opened right now, and it shuts down tight right around Thanksgiving, right?
Exactly. You know it well.
Piece of advice you would give to someone looking to either enter your industry, or piece of advice you give to companies that are looking to do things differently?
Entering the space and doing things differently is do it now. To my quote that's sitting right here in my office, right? Be here now, but do it with care and urgency. And I think you added the control.
Yes.
But don't.
Urgency, control, and be here now.
Yeah.
Love it. Yeah. Love it. As I said, this is the IVI podcast where we talk to innovators and visionaries, right?
Yep.
I'm gonna answer this question for you, because I believe that this organization has not only innovated for the last 20, 25 years. You guys are visionaries in where you're trying to take the company next. So I kind of answer that for you. But give me your definition of, what's the impact look like to you? What like if you look out 5 years from now and you could look at For Good, and For Good is, out there in the marketplace doing what you all are envisioning, what's that look like?
Movement. Yeah. Like we have moved the needle, even more than moved the needle, but it is ingrained in how giving is moved through the system. Like you see the impact, right? Like impact is movement. I don't even want to try to flush it out anymore, but when you look at For Good 5, 7, 10 years from now, that we have really moved the charitable giving space because we've been a vehicle that's not sitting around. The vehicle is moving, and it's moving quickly because we are responsive.
Well, I would argue that you all have already moved the charitable giving space in a significant way. And you're setting the bar high, which I think is absolutely required in this time that we're in right now. And I can't think of a firm that's better positioned with better history than you all have to really be the voice of what this kind of next phase of charitable giving looks like. So congratulations on all the work you guys have done, and on all the work
Thank you.
That's coming.
Yeah.
How do people get in touch with you? How do people interact with For Good?
Yeah, hit us up on the website.
Yeah.
Obviously, you have a direct line into me, Melissa.
Has the For Good website changed? Is there a new? It's
still, if you can type in forgood.org. If you happen to type in, Network for Good. It'll redirect you.
Okay, great.
With no problem. So definitely find me on email, phone, social, whatever it is. I am interested in continuing conversations with you and the Gavinga team, and then other folks in the space too, as we continue to disrupt.
Well, the conversation will continue, and at some point, I'm getting Abby Ross on here, because I think that combination of what you all are doing is just fascinating to me. So thanks very much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it. I thought this was going to be great, and
I hope I met your expectations.
Oh, you exceeded my expectations, as I knew you would. So thanks very much for taking the time.
Thank you, Joe. Take care.